This is Samsung's flagship quantum dot OLED TV, the S95C. Is it worth buying? Possibly. Now don't get me wrong, it's a stunning TV. It's the best TV I've ever owned. But at a certain point you have to consider how much you're paying for the additional performance when there are cheaper alternatives such as the lower tier model, the S90C, that provides you with roughly 80 to 90% of the performance at a substantially lower cost. Now what's the deal with quantum dot OLED? Why does it look so good? At the end of the day, it's an OLED TV, so you have an emissive display where you can control every single pixel individually, and that allows you to have perfect blacks and amazing contrast. But what separates QD-OLED TVs from other traditional OLED TVs? Well, LG's WRGB OLED TVs use red, green, blue OLEDs, a series of color filters, and a white subpixel to enhance brightness. Whereas Samsung's QD OLEDs use RGB OLEDs and then a thin film of quantum dots. These quantum dots get activated by the OLED lights and they provide brighter colors and also wider color volume. And since there are far fewer layers compared to the LG WRGB OLED displays, more of the OLED light is preserved and overall you get a brighter display. Now just to clarify, when I talk about brightness, I'm talking about white brightness. And when reviewers are talking about measuring peak white brightness, they're usually talking about measuring a 3% window or a 10% window of white brightness on the display. Now even though quantum dot OLEDs have greater overall brightness compared to standard WRGB OLEDs, LG came out with their own answer to QD OLED last year in the form of MLA OLED, or Meta OLED. This involves a layer of glass beads that help to refocus some of the scattered light that's lost through the various color filters. So when refocusing that light, they can achieve higher brightness. And when I'm talking about brightness, again, I'm referring to white brightness, not color brightness. The color brightness does improve a little bit as well with MLA OLED, but not to the same degree as quantum dot OLEDs. It's worth noting that LG's MLA OLED does actually exceed the white brightness compared to Samsung's quantum dot OLEDs. Alright, how do the benefits of quantum dot OLED affect the overall picture quality? Well, we have increased brightness, and like we mentioned before, that's white brightness, and we have increased color volume, so we can represent a wider array of colors. Scenes such as sunrises and sunsets are going to be reproduced much more faithfully on the QD OLEDs thanks to that wider color volume. They'll be able to have a smooth gradation of color versus traditional WRGB OLED TVs might struggle a bit more because they have less color volume, so you may witness some visible banding of colors where they can't represent as many colors. I've also noticed that darker scenes that maybe involve candles or lamps have a very nice warm glow to them, and the flame of a candle, for instance, has much more detail. As far as inputs go, we have 4 HDMI 2.1 ports available, and each of these ports are capable of 4K at 144 Hz versus a lot of the competition only offering 120 Hz. Again, this is going to be something that you're only going to be able to take advantage of if you have a very high-end gaming PC, but it's nice to have in case you do. This TV also has a game bar feature, which allows you to dial in your game settings even more, whether it's something related to the genre of the game or you want to optimize the input lag. Those options are available for you in the game bar and it's easily accessible. One significant feature that sets this TV apart from the competition is the use of the One Connect box. The One Connect box contains all the guts of the TV, so you can separate it from the TV panel itself. There's one thin cable that runs from the TV to the One Connect box. All of the HDMI ports, your power outlet, sound outputs are going to be contained on the back of the One Connect box. This offers people with some flexibility in where they choose to place the One Connect box. You can place it in your media stand or console like I have. Just keep in mind that if you are going to do that, you're going to need a console that has a pretty large depth. I was actually pretty surprised at how deep the One Connect box went into my console. I only have about an inch to spare, so keep that in mind if you're going to put it in a media unit. You also have the option of attaching it to the back of your TV so it functions more like a traditional TV, and it may come in handy if you're trying to wall mount your TV. You only have to run one cable from the One Connect box to the TV. This TV also has a pretty powerful anti-reflective coating, so if you're doing any daytime watching or watching the TV in a bright room, it's going to handle those reflections quite well. Most of the footage being used in this video is shot in a very bright room with sunlight coming through all the windows, so I think that's just a testament to how good the anti-reflective coating is and how bright the TV can get. The TV operating system is not bad. I tend to avoid TV operating systems as much as possible and refer to a media streamer for all of my streaming needs. Generally, your experience is going to be a lot better on a dedicated media streamer where its sole purpose is to provide you with those streaming apps. The software support is going to be a lot better than what you'll find on the TV. It's much less likely to be out of date than your TV streaming apps. It is quite simple to switch between different picture modes through the TV OS, so I appreciate that. However, it is kind of difficult to switch between sources. I really wish there was a dedicated source switching button on the remote. That would make that a lot quicker. As it currently stands, you have to hit the home button and then go on the left side menu to an option called Connected Devices, and there you're able to switch your sources. So it's a little more difficult than it needs to be for sure, especially compared to the LG offerings with WebOS. Now, as fantastic as this TV looks when watching movies or playing games, it does unfortunately have a few weaknesses. QD-OLEDs tend to have a bit more black crush and darker scenes in comparison to WRGB OLEDs, which tend to preserve the shadow detail a bit better. For my particular TV, I do have some color uniformity issues, specifically with darker scenes. In scenes that are just the right level of darkness, you can see some thin vertical bands go across the screen, and it's kind of frustrating. It's as if somebody smudged a bit of mud over the camera lens when they were shooting the scene. It's just noticeable enough to be annoying. And it's especially frustrating when you spend so much money on a TV to have something like that take you out of the experience. Now, your mileage may vary, as we're all at the mercy of the panel lottery, unfortunately. Two different people could get the same model of TV, and one person may have a much cleaner panel with better uniformity than the other person. Fortunately, there are pretty comprehensive TV warranties available now that will let you return your panel if you have a really dirty screen with bad uniformity, in hopes that the screen they give you is going to be even better. Unfortunately, sometimes people get their screen replaced and the replacement screen is even worse than the original screen. So I would say if you're experiencing some mild color uniformity issues with your TV, it's not serious and you don't see it that often, I would recommend just holding on to that versus replacing it, because you might run the risk of getting a panel that's actually worse than your current TV. And so in my situation, I'm going to keep my TV even though there's some minor color banding issues in darker scenes. Finally, I feel like you can't talk about a Samsung TV without talking about the lack of Dolby Vision HDR. And I have to say, I was pretty hesitant when buying this TV at first as well, because I was worried about missing out on Dolby Vision. But I can confidently say that after having this TV for the better part of a year, that you're really not missing out on that much. This TV displays HDR like a champ. It has HDR10 Plus as well, which I think goes toe-to-toe with Dolby Vision, and in fact, sometimes looks better than Dolby Vision because it tends to be brighter. Dolby Vision definitely is more widely supported across streaming apps and across 4K Blu-ray discs, but the support for HDR10 Plus is definitely growing. There is a lot of HDR10 Plus content available on Amazon Prime and Apple TV Plus, and even on Paramount Plus, I saw some content recently that was available with HDR10 Plus. So hopefully that will continue to grow, and the availability of HDR10 Plus will be more widespread over time. And there's maybe like 10 4K discs that support HDR10 Plus, so make sure you find those and you get them so you can use them with this TV. It's also worth noting that any content that has Dolby Vision HDR will also have the standard HDR10 available for you to use. So don't feel like if a particular streaming service offers a show with Dolby Vision that you're not going to be able to stream in HDR. You'll still have standard HDR10 available, which looks amazing. All right, should you get this TV? I'd say if you want all the benefits of a quantum dot OLED panel, but you don't want to pay the Sony premium tax, then go for it, get the S95C. The Sony A95L uses the same quantum dot OLED panel from Samsung Display, so you're going to get all the benefits from the QD-OLED there, but you'll have the advantage of the Sony XR Clear processing, which is supposed to be superior. Full disclosure, I don't have any first-hand experience with Sony TVs. I've only heard about how amazing their XR processing is, so keep that in mind. I've heard the Sony processing offers enhanced motion handling and upscaling and better picture clarity overall. With that enhanced picture clarity though, you'll often end up spending $500 to $1,000 more than the equivalently spec TV that you would get from LG or Samsung. So that's a pretty hefty cost to pay for just a tiny bit of extra performance in my opinion. But you are getting the addition of Dolby Vision back with the Sony TV, whereas the Samsung only supports HDR10 and HDR10 Plus. Now, if you want a QD-OLED panel and you don't want to pay the Sony tax, and you also don't want to pay the Samsung flagship prices, then you really should consider the lower tier option QD-OLED from Samsung, the S90C. It's an incredible TV that offers 80 to 90% of the performance, at a fraction of the cost. You're still getting all the benefits of a QD-OLED panel that we talked about previously, and you're only sacrificing a tiny bit of brightness and the One Connect box. And while the Samsung S95C is capable of hitting 1500, 2000 nits peak brightness, it's worth considering that most content, especially streaming content, is made in a 1000 nit peak container. So the content itself isn't going to exceed 1000 nits. So you have to question, even though your TV is capable of producing brighter results, if the content itself isn't that bright, is it worth spending all that extra money to get some potential performance that can't be reached realistically? The Samsung S90C is definitely the much better value proposition. You're getting way more bang for your buck there. So I would highly recommend that if you don't worry about the FOMO of missing out on a tiny bit of extra added brightness and better anti-reflective handling. The S90C screen is a lot more glossy and doesn't contain the same anti-reflective handling as the S95C. What about the LG G3? Well, I think you should consider the LG G3 if you want the craziest, most eye-searing brightness in all your specular highlights for things like explosions or really bright white scenes. If you want to be partially blinded by the content that you're watching, then I think you should go for the LG G3. I think it's also probably the better option for sports watching. If you're watching hockey games or soccer games or things of that nature, I think it's going to offer you a brighter screen overall. You will lose some color brightness with the LG G3 in comparison to the S95C or the S90C, but as long as you don't have the TV side by side, I think you'd hardly notice it. We are at the start of 2024, however, so you should consider the upcoming TVs that will come out probably sometime this spring. The upcoming Samsung S95D offers up to 50% more brightness, allegedly, and has a really intense matte coating that should handle those reflections even better than the current S95C. The new Samsung S95C is supposed to be able to hit a peak of 3000 nits, which is very impressive in comparison to last year's 2000 nits peak brightness. The upcoming LG G4 will also be able to hit a peak brightness value of 3000 nits, so that's something to keep in mind as well. Unlike the Samsung offerings that allow you to get up to a 77-inch QD-OLED display, with LG this year you'll be able to get an 83-inch MLA OLED TV. If you don't currently have the S95C and you're looking into getting it, I would hold out for the S95D unless you can get an insanely good clearance discount. I think the potential brightness increase in the S95D is worth waiting for. The matte finish is a bit more controversial, so we'll see how that turns out. A lot of people fear that when they view the TV at night, it's actually going to hinder the black performance compared to the more traditional glossy screen that really enhances the blacks and makes them nice and inky and wet looking. So we'll see how the matte finish turns out. I'm a little bit nervous about that as well, but the 50% additional brightness is always a welcome change. If you're considering getting a non-flagship OLED TV such as the Samsung S90C or the LG C3, I would just go ahead and try to get those now, especially if they're on really good clearance discounts, because I don't think the next version of those TVs is going to be that much different than the current versions, so I wouldn't hold out and waiting for the C4 or the S90D. One tip that I thought was worth mentioning is that when you're assembling the TV, be super careful when you're attaching the base to the panel. Once you've assembled the base of the TV and you're getting ready to screw it on to the back of the TV, make sure that you have the screw holes lined up perfectly. I made the mistake of not being very careful when I was doing this, and it was super duper sketchy. I couldn't get that last screw to screw in properly, and so I tried to get the base off of the back of the TV, and I couldn't do so by just trying to pull it off. So I had to prop the TV up vertically. It was flat on its face initially, and I had to prop it up vertically, and I had to let gravity help me get the base of the TV off, which was kind of spooky to do for a $4,000 TV. So pay extra careful attention when you're lining up those screw holes. It will save you a lot of heartache. Well, that's pretty much it. Let me know if you plan on buying the Samsung S95C or if you plan on buying any of the TVs I mentioned in the video. There's a lot of options available, so choose wisely. If you ever experience color uniformity issues, let me know.